and we're good to go.
Awesome. Okay. Welcome. This is a real pleasure for me, Nathan, to have you on. I know you're probably in pretty hot demand at the moment with all of this Amazon Prime stuff going on with the world's toughest race. Have you had plenty of people approaching you?
Oh, I've had plenty of messages, which has been quite nice. Just congratulations and some friends that have kind of seen it pop up around the place. But to be honest, in terms of media demands and things, no, it hasn't been that overwhelming. So no, it's easy to come and chat. So all good.
Yeah. Awesome. But I think something like that's probably the hardcore people who pay attention to that stuff is probably, they're right into it. They're right, they know as soon as it came on, they were onto it watching it. I think it may be something like a slow burn for people who are less across the sport.
Yeah, I think so. I think exactly what you said. The sort of event racing community sort of knew the event was on, and they essentially been waiting for the production to come out, so they were first onto it. But I think as time goes on, the wider audience will start to kind of see it, and I guess the wider sort of media that don't necessarily follow event racing per se. So yeah, it seems to be getting good interest and lots of attention, which is cool.
So I suppose they don't tell you. They don't just pipe in and say, "Hey, look, this is doing really well," or because it's all up to them, isn't it? I know with Netflix, they never really tell anybody what the shows are doing, how popular they are. They just say, "Yeah, it's doing good. You get a new series," and I guess time will tell.
I suspect so. I think they're going forward with plans to organise another eco challenge, but given the scale of the budget, if it's not getting favourable ratings, it's probably not justifiable. So yeah, hopefully they get good viewership and the ratings are good and people kind of give them a few stars and the show can go on.
Are you in for round 2?
Oh, it's probably a bit early to say. I'm still been watching the series with my family. We're up to about episode 6 now, and half the time I go, yeah, it'd be great to go and do another one of those again. And the other half of the time I'm going, man, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I've got it in me for another one. So I don't know. I think also it's pretty hard, I think for everyone at the moment to think how this COVID situation is going to play out, and when we're going to be able to travel freely around the world again, and for us in New Zealand, what the implications of that will be if we leave, what's involved coming back and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Yeah. It's just kind of hard to set long-term goals at the moment.
A lot of commitment, when it comes to something like that. If they expect you to quarantine on the way back, you almost add 2 weeks. Well, you do. You definitely add 2 weeks to your issue, and that makes it a lot more harder.
Yeah, it does. And I guess for all our team now, we've all got families and, with kids, and we all work back in New Zealand doing various things. So to go away for a race is one thing, but to go away and then have to come home and quarantine is another. And I guess there's so much uncertainty too around, I've heard some pretty outrageous prices for flights traveling around the world. So I don't know. I think we'll just see what happens in that space.
Because I know I was looking at the website today for that the second installment, I suppose they call it, for Patagonia. And I think the applications are out now only for another few more days. They actually, by the time this airs, they'll probably be closed. But it's one of those things that's a whole different sort of, from what I can see, Patagonia, and you've probably raced there before, it seems like you've raced all over the world. It'd be a whole different kettle of fish to what Fiji was, being, cold and, rather than the heat. Mind you, that I've watched a few of the episodes as well. Looked like it got pretty cold up there as well.
Yeah, it's funny that cause I had raced in the Eco Challenge in Fiji in 2002, and over that time, people have often asked me, what is the hardest race you've done, or what has kind of been one of the hardest things you've done in a race, or probably more specifically is what's the coldest you've ever been in a race? And I always used to say it was Fiji.
Really?
Because in the 2002 Eco Challenge Fiji, we had to swim on those interior lakes as well, and that I just remember being so bitterly cold and miserable up in that highlands, and it was the same with this race. But Patagonia for sure is really different. I think a little bit hard to know exactly where in Patagonia they may go. Like I have raced in the northern part of Patagonia before, and that's actually quite pleasant, New Zealand. But the southern Patagonia for sure, it's cold, it's high, it's real, thick forest and vegetation and big mountains. So yeah, that would be a pretty epic place to race, I think.
Yeah, it's crazy to think Fiji. It was such like a such different climates there. You see them in the hot and guys walking with no shirts on because they just can't survive. And there was that one bloke at the start that looked like he'd run the engine too hot, and he they hammered that first pedal. Obviously, maybe to get, I don't know what their issue was there. I don't know whether they want to try and get out in front or make a statement, but and then to the top where there's people pulling out with hypothermia. It seems like that shouldn't be really the climate you should have to deal with.
No, that's right. I think especially for us New Zealand and Australians who kind of associate Fiji with sort of holiday at the beach. You go there, nice climate, warm seas, and just enjoy that kind of coastal Fiji. But it is huge diversity in temperatures there, and I think that's why a lot of teams struggled in the mountains are high up, because even when we were sort of told to expect some cold temperatures and cold water to swim in, when you're down essentially at sea level and you're starting that stage that's going to go up Vivoa Falls and into the interior, like you say, it's kind of 30 degrees temperature and you're sitting there sweating, and the idea of sort of putting a wetsuit into your pack just doesn't register.
Yeah.
You think, how is it possible that we could be cold here? And the other thing I think a lot of people thought, I certainly did, was I was actually thinking, well, if we have to swim some cold water, tonight or tomorrow, then I'll welcome it. It'd be beautiful to jump into some nice cold water. But
5 minutes later, you're like, I stuffed this one up.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it looked like it was such a battle.
I think too. And we should have known better. We should have taken more gear, really, to be prepared for that. But I think when you're in those races, that your body does become hypersensitive to temperatures, whether they be hot or cold. And normally you might think, I'm going to be swimming for an hour or so in some chilly water. Well, as long as we keep moving, we'll be all right. But when you've been racing for 2 or 3 days or 4 days for some people, your body doesn't have many reserves, and you throw yourself into an environment like that, and it's actually pretty dangerous. I think it's luckily everyone made it through.
That sort of brings me to another question I had for you. Like while I was watching the show, I saw when you guys capsized, and then they were pretty keen for you to get straight back in the water. And you're only up to episode 6. You might not actually be up to this part, but I mean you were there, so that doesn't matter. But I was actually really surprised that they I didn't think about that. Idiot. They I was actually surprised that they actually aired it, because you actually said, look, you were pretty, in your sort of most non-controversial way, you sort of were a little bit pissed off that they'd actually said, I'll just get you a new canoe and get straight back into it, and you were a little bit annoyed about that from what I could see. So it's it makes a lot of sense that the way you say it, that it's controversial, they actually aired that part. I was really confused by that. I thought, well, that doesn't really put them in such a good light. That's more about the show than it is the race itself.
Yeah, I haven't seen that part of the show, and I think it would be interesting to see it. But I think what sort of happened that night, as well as the context of the situation. So we've been out there for, I don't even know how many days we took in the end, whether it be 5 or 6 or 7 days, I can't remember. But it was on the last night, and we'd actually gone through a pretty intense ordeal at sea when we got hit by a sort of a squall come through. So we were in reasonably big seas, high winds, and no visibility. And we kind of made it through that. And then it was essentially the calm after the storm. And that's when we sort of, I wouldn't say we dropped our guard, but we sort of started to sort of think, nothing can really stop us now. We're on our way to win this race.
Yeah.
And then that happened, and then I guess I just sort of felt at the time that, we were sort of abandoned at sea in some ways. The support boat that, was with us at the start had disappeared somewhere, and then the boat basically fell apart. The one that we were, the boat that I guess essentially the organisation provided. And then I think I was just in a bit of shock when, after all the effort of getting us out of the water and then getting us another boat, and then they'd actually taken us further back down the course where we'd already come from. So we had to go and paddle over some sort of water that we'd already paddled before a few hours earlier. And then just to kind of say to us, that's just racing, just get back out there and get back into it. And if you guys want to win the race, you better get back on the water, because there's some teams pretty close. And I don't know, I think for a lot of the races we do, in the World Series or World Champs, they have slightly different sort of rules, I guess, governing things like that. And I probably was just thinking more about what would happen at a World Champs or in a World Series race where, we would probably most likely be time credited for the time we lost. And, they would sort of look at the GPS tracker and go, oh, well, you guys lost 4 or 5 hours out here. So, carry on paddling, but just so you know that we'll credit that time. But there was none of that, and I think that made me a bit grumpy at the time.
Yeah, you can be forgiven too. You're probably 6, like you said, 5-6 days deep, and probably not a great deal of sleep.
Exactly.
So I can't imagine you being the most pleasant of mindsets. But that was a crazy part, and also what I found pretty funny when I was watching too. Well, probably not funny to you, but they would say, they'd send you guys off on a bike ride, and they'd say, oh, they've got a 55k mountain bike ride through the hills. And as you know, that's no mean feat. Like, that's not something you just click your fingers and go and do. Granted, you're 6 days deep in racing, and then it would shoot to another crew and follow them for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then come back and say, oh, and the Kiwis are finished, and into the net. And I was sort of thinking, like, do you not realise that that's actually like a massive... That's a race in and of itself, just that 155k bike. But and I guess I know they've got time, restrictions when it comes to viewing. But it was just a crack up, because then people were sitting at home thinking, oh, okay, just knock out a 55k ride. But that's like, it just seemed crazy to me to think that it was just breeze. It could really be like a 30 episode series.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and it did sort of jump around quite a bit from story to story. And I think you're right. I think given the parameters they've got to fit, tell the whole story of the event, I guess you could say, I suppose in the 10 episodes is quite limiting. There has been some feedback, I guess, from more the racing community that they would like a more kind of a racing-focused kind of production.
Yeah,
which will probably focus more on just say those top teams and how the top 10 sort of fight it out, sort of thing. But I personally think if you're just going to do one show, it's better to go for the wider audience appeal and have all the different stories and a more diverse group of people, so there's more people that the audience can relate to. But yeah, sometimes it does. It kind of just brushes over, which is actually a pretty big stage. There's a lot happened in that time.
Yeah, I found it a little bit frustrating. I was like, you just anyway, you could get right into it because it happens so many times. You just think that's no mean feat. Oh, they just did a 60k paddleboard. You think, bloody hell, like that would put most people out for a week. But here's you doing it 4 days in or 5 days in, and then also the same was with that rock climb, the one you started at night. You're at the base and they're saying 8 hours later the Kiwis are at the top. Like 8 hours. That's 8 hours in the dark on the rocks. Anyway, I just found it quite humorous in thinking it sort of paints not an unrealistic picture of what happens. It paints like people can sit at home and just assume that that's a really easy thing to do. And I guess that's what I was most frustrated about.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I suppose that, I don't know what the sort of producers were thinking and stuff, but I suppose they're just relying on the audience to sort of make those connections when they kind of zoom back in the field and say, now we're with this team who's on the same mountain bike ride and look at the struggle they're having. And I
guess they had to make it's the dichotomy of it. They had to make it look not make it look really easy for you, but make it look like you guys were doing it a lot easier than you probably were, with all due respect. And then they had to go back and paint the narrative at the back of it as well and make it look like it was really, really difficult for people who weren't as experienced as your team.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think too, as a team, and we're not the only team, some of the other top teams are the same, is, because we've been doing these races for quite a while, and I guess we sort of know mentally how to stay focused and just stay positive out there. I think sometimes it is actually quite tricky for the camera folks to capture the top team struggling, because you just got strategies in place to kind of stay positive and stay focused and not sort of not let yourself get beaten up by the course. So it's probably quite a challenge for them to actually get some of those a lot of the top teams to actually give them any sort of indication of how hard they are, how hard it is. Yeah,
that's one big thing I wanted to talk to you about was the just the sheer time out there, and as you know, like having to stay focused for that amount of time. It just almost seems, I don't want to say it'd be boring because he's certainly probably not bored out there, but just keeping your mind, Because your mind naturally goes to a dark place when you're in a situation like that. You're 3 days deep, 4 days deep. You've had very little sleep. You do have a job to do, but you're still, what's the word? Like you still, it's still these long, arduous tasks that just must, the demons in your head, or I call it head noise in my head, would just be off the Richter scale.
Yeah. I think one thing Eco Challenge does really well, or did really well, is that none of the stages were particularly long by normal adventure racing stages. Like, to give you an example, we did a race, the World Champs in 2018, I think it was, in Reunion Island. The first stage was about 130 kilometre trekking stage, which I think took 30 to 40 hours, like whatever it was like a day and a half. And I think in those stages where you do one thing for just continuously for a long time, that's what I think your mind goes to, kind of more challenging places. But in Eco Challenge, the stages were never super long. So whatever stage you're on, you didn't really have to sort of do that much of it before you could sort of start thinking about the next stage and what was going to be happening there, or how that transition was kind of happening and things. And then added to that, I think, is that once you're actually out on course, time actually does start to take on a different sort of dimension. And I often find the first day time goes quite slow. It feels like you've been out there for ages, and you look at your watch, it's like, oh, we've only been racing for 5 hours or something so far. I thought it was 10. But once you sort of get into the thick of the race, like day 2, 3, 4, days just start blasting by. Without kind of realizing. And yeah, pretty much. And I guess you're exploring new terrain, so you're always going somewhere new, so it's quite stimulating. There's always, well, not always, but there's often interesting things to look at, whether it be passing through a village, or something cultural, or if you're lucky enough, there might be some wildlife, or just the wilderness. And then added to that, you've got your teammates, to kind of chat to and tell jokes to, and talk about stuff. So often the time can actually pass pretty quick. I find during a race.
Is there a lot of chatter amongst your team? Because your team's considered let's start with this. How do you feel about them coming at you with the Michael Jordan of adventure racing?
Oh, no, not very comfortable. I wish I was.
Yeah. Well, you're probably not far off. Yeah.
No, but I think Michael would have a bit of a laugh at how much prize money we won, and
I think he gambles that on a game of golf.
Yeah, that's right. On a hole, I would think.
Yeah, maybe.
But I mean, I kind of get what they're trying to make a point. That we are, I guess, for the people watching, at the moment, we're as good as it gets. The top teams are at this race, so I understand that. I understand that part of it.
Trying to relate, aren't they? They're trying to do some sort of relation so that the people who don't know what the hell they're looking at can, that's a good comparison to show you that, at the standard, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Especially for the US audience, they'll understand that, and they'll go, oh, okay, these guys are actually the real deal. It's not just some reality TV show where there's just all these random people out there doing this big adventure.
So to get one more, we'll go off Eco Challenge. I know you probably should talk about it through your thing, but I noticed one thing too when you were speaking. I think it was at the start. As Kiwis, I guess, and because I'm Kiwi myself, as Kiwis, you're sort of a little bit like there's a modesty that goes with it. Like you sort of play a lot of stuff down. And I did notice, and I've listened to a couple of interviews from you and just some some things online. And for the most part, you stay in that humble avenue. And then you did say about you getting ahead, and I wonder whether you were coerced into this or whether you were, sort of decided to say that yourself. But you sort of said, look, the reality is I think the word was, the reality is if we get ahead, no one's really going to catch us. You said that in not so many. I'm just paraphrasing a little bit. That's basically what you said was the reality of it is if we're ahead, everyone's got a shit show. Like there's no one coming near us. And I guess you have respect for your teams that are behind you because obviously that they're a real threat. But it was just sort of going towards the fact that like we are very, very good, and we know that we're very, very good. And if you let us go, it could be all over.
Yeah, that's right. There was definitely a few things that I've seen in the footage where I think is probably mainly Tim, one of the producers, was very good at fishing for sound bites.
Yes.
And I think there's a couple of things in there that are probably a little bit out of context, but you're right in that there is a point in most races where our team will kind of decide to essentially, I mean, to steal a term from cycling, when a cyclist tries to have a go, they kind of start attacking. You sort of go on the attack sort of thing. And although our team wouldn't sort of use that language that much, that's essentially what we do. Is we look for a time in the race where we think the other teams are vulnerable, or that we have an opportunity to play to our strengths, and we sort of feel if we can sort of strike now and go for it, we might actually be able to, build up a lead here that no one will get back. And historically, when our team has done that, we pretty much nearly always sort of pull it off. I wouldn't say always, but most of the time. And I think in Fiji there was a point where we did that, and we're like, well, I think if we go now, we'll be pretty hard to peg back. There was, because I guess one other thing in the race in the production was I don't think it's really talked that much about the compulsory sleep that teams had to have, and that kind of has a little bit of bearing as well, because it can make the race look a little bit closer than what it is if some teams have logged a lot of their compulsory sleep and other teams haven't. So, I guess when you're out on course, there might be a team that you kind of know is only about an hour behind you in real time, but you might have had 3 or 4 hours more compulsory sleep than they have. So, we would view that as actually big.
How did that work in this particular one? Is that something because that's a little bit unusual, isn't it? Or is this because of the compulsory sleep side of it?
Yeah, it's coming into the sport a bit more and more as time goes on. Some races are just you sleep when you think you need to and go nuts. Other races now start to introduce this compulsory sleep, and it's largely for safety reasons. It basically forces teams to get some sleep, because there are some teams that would try and do a whole race like that with no sleep, and some race directors are just not willing to run the risk of having that teams out there just in that sleep deprived state. So I think an Eco Challenge is a bit of a weird number. I think it was 11 or 13 hours of compulsory sleep that we needed to log, and we essentially had a sleep card, and there were certain checkpoints and camps that you could clock in, and you just say to the staff there, we want to take some of our compulsory sleep here. So they would basically time you in and then time you out.
Yep.
And so some teams used up their sleep card quite quickly. Others kind of didn't use much until the end. So it can vary quite a bit.
I was watching some of those back teams. You must be frustrated sort of watching them, thinking, do you look at it and think, this would be so frustrating to race with these guys, I just want to keep going, and they sort of want to stop and have a chat, and then they're chatting to people, and then there was one team that decided they were going to go backtrack at the start there at the very first hike leg, just to try just because to be not dangerous. I was thinking, they were probably almost halfway, and they went all the way back and ended up stuffing them up in the beginning. But how frustrating is that? Do you think people maybe underestimate how much they can do with little sleep?
Yeah, I think some people probably do, but I suppose for me it is fascinating to see what's going on back in the field there, and I think it would be very easy for me and my teammates and the experienced athletes to go, oh, this is crazy, look at what these guys are doing. But so many of them are actually novices, or rookies is the term they'll use, and they actually haven't really had the opportunity to learn those lessons yet. And I think for us it'd be really easy, or it's really easy for me to sit there and go, these guys are making completely the wrong decision here. They should do this instead.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot. Like I've watched, like I said, the first 6 episodes, and I'm looking at a lot of those back teams going, well, they've got this all wrong. But, like I've had more than 20 years of event racing experience to kind of gather that wisdom and kind of be involved in the sport and learn all that. So I think it's actually good that people are all on different stages of that journey, and then they're kind of learning and looking for those ways they can improve, and that's what will often get people going back to a race, is that when they process it, they go back and go, man, there's so many places we could have improved, let's have another crack, and next time we'll do these things differently, and hopefully get a better outcome.
How much of a skill is going when tired? Like, is that something you practice? Do you know what? This is how I look at it. I look at it like, have you heard of boxers? How some boxers spar, if they spar a lot, it almost to their detriment, or they spar a lot so they're used to being in a fight. Is it something that you practice being tired so that you know that you can function when tired? Or is it something that you just save and save and save until you have to? Then you go, right, this is where I'm going to use my stores in the race. Is it something, what I'm trying to say is it's something you can use up early. You don't want to have too many days of non-sleep. You want to use it all in a race situation.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think years ago when we first started, we used to go and actually train for sleep deprivation. So we would actually go out and do big missions and go through the night and not sleep. But what we found is that we would struggle to recover from those big sessions. So, we just decided that we're better off to just train hard sort of during a day and then actually get some quality recovery. And I think the other thing is that, as you do more races, you kind of actually learn more about how to look after yourself and how to manage the sleep better, and when's actually really vital to actually go and get some sleep.
Is it like that self-care? I know you pushed a lot as well. I've heard you speak about it a lot. Is that one of the most, almost just as important as being fit, as self-care?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think especially in a race like Fiji, like to succeed in the sport, I mean, obviously you need to look after your teammates and look after each other, but the biggest thing you can actually do to help your team is look after yourself and manage your own hydration and nutrition. And in a place like Fiji, it's actually all cuts any chance of getting infections or secondary infections to things. Managing all that is hugely important. Hey, I just noticed my computer's just flashed up. It's got a low battery.
You're right. Do what you got to do.
So, I'll just quickly go and plug in the power.
You're right. Go for it.
Cool. Sorry about that. My wife was walking around. I was hoping I'd get her to.
You're trying to signal to her, eh?
It's all
right, mate. We're pretty informal here. We got it sorted. You're welcome to go to the toilet or get another cup of tea, whatever you got to do. It's all good.
No worries.
I'm as you can probably tell, it's like I've watched this. I myself have done about probably 20 kilo ago. I did a few shorter races, and so the sheer volume of what it is you can tackle over that space. Granted, you're probably not doing it at the speed you would a 2-day or a single-day race, but just the sheer volume of what you can chew out, in 7 days and just continue to do so, it just blows me away. Like I don't think it's until you do something similar that you can actually have a true appreciation for what it is that you guys are getting through.
Yeah, totally. And I think that is, it's a natural thing to think. And I'll be honest, when I look at the show, I kind of get blown away too. Just what everyone's out there doing and for how long. And I think, when I first started racing, the first adventure race I did was in 1999. And I remember standing on the start line going, man, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. Like, this just seems like this outrageous challenge right in front of us. We're about to head out on this course. But you sort of get out there and you get into it, and I think you almost enter another dimension where time takes on new meaning and distance takes on new meaning, and somehow you just kind of get through it, and you just learn how to, I guess, just do the small things that add up to the whole. So just being comfortable and having the right food so that you feel comforted by that, but also have the energy and sort of, I don't know, just kind of have ideas about how you're going to interact with your teammates and stuff. There's lots of things that you can just kind of pull together to, I guess, break down the scale of the challenge.
Yep.
But it probably took me maybe 10 or 15 races, expedition length races, before I actually stand on the start line and be confident that I'll be fine. I'll be fine to get through this. Just trust it.
Yeah. Seems like
because it is. That's right. It is. That's right. It is. Yeah.
That's it's the insurmountableness of it, I guess, and just, if that's a word. But like you sort of, I look at it from the outside looking in, and it just seems, like and I guess maybe you probably thought that too on the start line of a race, but probably particularly the one you've just done, for the simple fact that you knew there were so many novice people there or rookies there, and you can sort of look and think, I wonder if these people really understand the shit they're about to go through, like that would be almost a comforting feeling. Maybe you think, well, I'm not going to suffer as much as that person, so at least I'll be all right.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many things that can happen in a venture race. Like I'm very careful about what I kind of think or hope for. I think you just have to be so prepared for whatever comes your way. But it is definitely pretty funny at the start of the race sometimes with the rookie races, because the reality is that a lot of them actually they don't have any idea what they're actually got themselves into.
Yeah.
And some of them rise to the occasion and do exceptionally well, and others just sort of learn the hard way that I've actually bitten off more than I can chew. But that's one thing that I think's quite special about the sport, in that you do get that huge variety of people on the start line, and that diversity. And there's, if you actually take the time to kind of learn more about the people that are in the race, which I've done, to be honest, not so much in Fiji this year, but in other races I've done, you can meet some incredible people who some of them are actually leaders in their own fields, but just they're not adventure racers. So they've just come from being super achieving in another field and decided they want to do something outrageously crazy like a big adventure race. And there's some pretty talented people sort of scattered around when you have that big group of diverse people.
Yeah, because I guess it's you could consider it, I guess, not overachievers, but it's not for everyone. It's only for people who are thinking. To be honest, you probably got something wrong with you somewhere along the line, or maybe something right with you. I don't know, but and I think I've heard a lot of people mention that it's the comforts. In life, I guess we get used to comforts, and everybody lives a comfortable life. Everything we do is comfortable. You can go through a drive-through and get a meal. You can turn on the TV, you can turn on the heater. Everything's easy. And to step outside and actually put yourself in something that couldn't be more opposite of easy, there's probably a certain amount of fulfillment you get out of that as well, I would assume.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can only really speak for myself in that sense, but I'm like that. Like, I find that modern life, if I have too much of it, as much as I love it, like there's aspects of it I really, really love, if I have too much of it for an extended period of time, I sort of get a bit numbed by it, and I just sort of seek being out in nature and the simplicity of just basically walking in the mountains with just a backpack with a few basic possessions, and drinking from streams and cooking on fires and sleeping under the stars, that kind of stuff. And I think it's that lifestyle that actually lends us to the adventure racing. It's not necessarily, well, certainly for myself, and I think for my teammates at least, we are adventurers first, and then adventure racers second. So we've almost sort of become good adventure racers because we just have such a passion for getting out and just doing adventures, and that's really what kind of drives us, I guess. But I think you're right. I think there's just a percentage of people that will look at Eco Challenge, World's Toughest Race, and go, man, that's something I want to do. The bulk of the audience will go, well, that's interesting, but I have no desire to do anything like that. And that's cool.
Yeah. It's understandable, isn't it? Yeah, I can understand. But it's weird you say also that if you have too much of something, you crave sort of being outdoors. If you don't get that outdoor experience, then you don't know what it is you're having too much of. In a sense that people don't really understand that you can actually be numb to all of the creature comforts. You can be numb to it and just assume they're going to be there. And it's not till you step out and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation that you realise that you were comfortable, if that makes sense. Or maybe they seek uncomfortable situations and other things, non-constructive things potentially.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, and I think that's perhaps one of the challenges is that, the modern developed society is that as you have a few generations of people that have lived in a fairly comfortable environment, that they are detached from that. I think we're reasonably lucky in New Zealand that, our parents, or certainly our grandparents, I mean, they did it pretty hard, They kind of, you hear the stories about what they had to face. So we're not that far away from a very basic, quite difficult and challenging kind of existence that they had. certainly for me as a parent, that's really important to me that my kids have that awareness and actually know how to suffer a bit, and that it's actually a luxury to come home to a warm house and hot water running and a comfy bed, and a dry roof over your head.
Yeah.
And they know from sort of doing these fairly challenging outdoor experiences that we do as a family that there's another sort of world out there. So I think as society kind of propels itself down that pathway, the role of, I guess, outdoor education providers and giving people those experiences, or providing those experiences, becomes increasingly more important, I think.
Is that what you do? Is that what you do for it without going too much into your personal information? Is that sort of what you do for a living? Is that, or are you like what keeps you going? Like, are you you're obviously a full-time adventure racer, but do you do that as a living as well as those sorts of tours?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not a full-time adventure racer. I used to be. I was professional for a number of years, but now last year we only did the one race. This year we were planning to do a couple more, but it didn't work out. But my career and qualifications has actually been outdoor education. So for many years I worked in outdoor centres or within school programs, essentially just teaching outdoor disciplines, rock climbing, navigation, kayaking, whatever it may be. And I've also worked a lot in adventure tourism, more from the guiding side of things. So you sort of blend the two together, and with a pretty diverse skill set in the outdoors. As well as that, I've always been a competitor in different things. Mainly, I started mountain bike racing, and then I went to multi-sport, coast to coast type stuff. And then I guess if you're on that pathway, adventure racing is kind of the holy grail. Really, you want to step up to the big expedition races. So to cut a long story short, I've pretty much spent 30 years, in the outdoors, and now we have a adventure event sporting events company that specialises in adventure racing. It's all been pretty much.
It's all in that same. It's no surprise you go well at those races. Actually, if you're doing it for a living too, you sort of it becomes a comfort out there. So you're out there, you're effectively comfortable being uncomfortable, because most people are uncomfortable in that environment where they're out in the wilderness and in an uncomfortable situation, but that's home for you.
It is a home, and you did right. And for a lot of my life, certainly as an outdoor instructor, we'd be in the mountains or living out of a tent sort of 4 or 5 nights a week. And an outdoor education program goes on pretty much regardless of the weather. So standing around in the mountains in rain, with wet feet and wet boots for 10 hours a day is, that was my job for a while. So it has enabled me to adapt to the adventure racing lifestyle, because it's largely what I've done as a career. So it's pretty lucky.
What do you think it is about, because I know you probably know quite a few of the top guys who are in the shorter course stuff, like your Braden Curry and guys like that. Why do you think it is that they don't? They sort of, I noticed some of them try and do the longer stuff. Do you think it's maybe just they think it's not for them? They'd rather come in and do like a 1 day long race than suffer for 5 or 6 days out in the bush. Like, I know without sort of, you can't really comment on why they do and don't like it, but is it something that it's just for only some people? Only some people want to commit that sort of time to a race?
Yeah, I think it would depend on a lot of variables, I think. I guess one of the things is, as athletes, you try and sort of make a bit of a niche for yourself in a particular sport. And I think there comes a time where you have to specialise a bit.
Yeah. And
if you choose, whether you choose to be on Xterra or multi-sport, coast to coast type stuff, or whether you go Ironman, whether you go venture racing, whatever it may be. So I think there comes a point where I think athletes sometimes will choose where they're going to focus their sport, not 100% based on what their real passion is, but where they can sort of see it being sustainable, or perhaps where they can make a career.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of that. And then I also think that for a lot of the athletes, adventure racing, you can actually do it when you're a bit older. So through those peak years, when you're at your kind of physical peak for endurance sport, probably in your late 20s through 30s, you can kind of go and do a lot of that stuff and know that, once my body's all beaten up and and can't do that, then I'll go adventure racing where it's kind of
Seems
slow
like it should be the
motion
opposite,
sport for
doesn't
sort
it?
of 5-6 days. A little bit. Yeah, I would have thought that years ago, but I'm 48 now, and I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I can still kind of make my way through one of these courses. Just using a lot of it. Just because you've got so much experience.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's experience, is it? It's just, yeah. Granted, you got to have a level of fitness. I don't take that away from you, but a lot of it's experience. You know how to hurt. You know how to just stay in the hurt locker for hours on end. You know that this too shall pass when it comes to the legs.
Yeah, experience is a big part. I think, obviously, fitness and strength and skills and all those things as an individual you need to have. But it is a team sport, and ultimately you need to have a really strong team that ticks all the boxes for what a successful team is. So you can be an amazing athlete, amazing navigator, have all the qualities needed to be a venture racer, but if you haven't got that right combination of people around you, you're probably not going to enjoy that much success. And that does happen. There's a lot of really good athletes that are scattered around in teams, but they just haven't managed to get themselves in that kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, winning combo, perhaps.
With when you're trudging through some of these races, how much time do you spend watching your teammates? Like, are you? I guess now probably your team's been together so long in one way or another that you probably can rely on each other not to, you know what they like, you know what their tendencies are. Do you actually have to watch them and think, oh, maybe he looks like he's battling here, he's going to say something? Or are you guys being so close that you just, someone will speak up? Like, have you got that close-knit side of it, or are you actually watching them to find those tells?
No, we can definitely trust each other to look after ourselves. As team captain, one of the things I do though is just kind of monitor the team's, I guess, collective energy. So there'll be times in a race where, well, perhaps one way of saying this is it's quite rare in a race when all four people are feeling awesome at the same time.
Yep.
So often what I'm doing is just kind of noticing, someone's having a little bit of a low patch. Someone's just kind of tailing off a bit here, or whatever it may be, or they're struggling a little bit here. So often I'll be just kind of just checking in with people or making suggestions on, maybe moving a bit of gear around. But it's not reliant on me doing that. Like, the team are professional enough, and there really isn't any ego in the team where that would be a barrier. But I think it is helpful if there's someone who's just stepping back and just, in order for our team to reach our absolute full potential, I think it is important that myself in the role of captain is actually just stepping back and having a look at that overview. And I suppose for me, that allows me to kind of be the main strategist in the team, as well as to putting forward ideas to the team as, when we should sleep, perhaps when we should try and go a bit harder, and what's coming up, any kind of concerns or fears that I may have about what I can see happening. That could be weather, different things that are happening. But if I've been monitoring or just have a really good awareness of where the team are as individuals, then that can help kind of shape strategy. And I kind of go, hey, look, everyone's on fire at the moment. We need to kind of go to work here and see if we can, bite off a big section of the course while we're all feeling fresh.
Yeah. I guess that answers the question I had earlier as well about what you spend your time thinking about. Because if you're always having to think, not necessarily for other people, but about other people the whole time, and just monitor what they're doing, I guess that takes up a little bit of your time as well. It takes up some of that downtime that you've got to kill.
Oh, for sure. You're often thinking about stuff all the time, and wherever you are on a stage, and it could be sort of navigation and route choice. We might be having discussions about that. It might be impending weather that's coming in. There might be dark zones that are coming up that we're concerned about. Are we going to get risk of being stopped by this dark zone, or if we speed up, could we make it past this? Get past the dark zone. There's lots of stuff that we can continue to be talking about. What gear should we potentially take on the next stage that we weren't planning to, but maybe it's a good idea now that we've actually been out on course. Food stuff. Are we getting through are we carrying too much food? Are we not carrying enough? Are we carrying too much of one thing and not enough of another? So I think as a team that is in pursuit of excellence, I think we're always looking at ways to just make sure we're not. Well, essentially, it's avoiding mistakes.
Yeah,
We're just
that's
trying
it.
to make sure that we're not making any mistakes out there.
It seems a lot of it too, from what I've seen as well. A lot of people are concentrating on racing fast and doing all the stuff and being the fastest crew, but it's almost seems like it's the team that makes the least mistakes and that looks after themselves the most is generally one of the more successful ones. Not necessarily winners, and then you get the perfect storm of a winning team that does that. Hence why you've probably been successful, because you eliminate all those barriers.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's other teams out there that race amazingly well, and they get great results. Like to finish, in Fiji, obviously there was it was pretty close in the end between a number of different teams, and they're great athletes, racing really well. I think sometimes just different teams' kind of philosophies and things can just they can be a bit different. And I think for our team, one thing that serves us really well is just focusing very much on ourselves. And we have this kind of view of an expedition race that we try and eliminate the fact that there's 65 other teams out there, and we just try and look at the task as just us getting through the course as fast as we can. And I think what that sort of transpires to is that if we're struggling for a while, then we don't put pressure on ourselves to go fast, and if we're feeling great, then we're not afraid to to go out there and push the pace. And I think the more you can be just self-focused on getting your own team throughout the course and not be distracted by other teams, I think the better it will serve you.
As far as training goes for this, you've obviously built up probably a natural just level of fitness that you stay at, I would assume, and you probably can touch on this more. What sort of what does your week to week look like when it comes to just in this zone here, where you're sort of just making sure you don't put your feet up on the couch and stay there for a week and not do anything? Like what's your week like at the moment?
Yeah, my general kind of what I consider to be sort of maintenance training is that I would aim to do 1 to 2 hours of exercise every day.
Yep.
So
that's maintenance.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Mate, yep.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I might just go, run for an hour or go out for a 2 hour bike ride, or sometimes go for a 2 hour run, or I might go for a 1 hour bike ride and a 1 hour paddle, whatever it is. So I'm at the end of each day or start of each day, or perhaps the day before, I'm thinking, how am I going to move my sort of blocks around tomorrow to ensure that I get 1 or 2 hours exercise in a day.
Yep.
And then added to that, like we mentioned before, is a lot of the work I do is quite physical. So I'm actually out designing adventure racing courses and doing timings for hikes and paddles, and so it's not that unusual for me to maybe be out doing 5-6 hours exercise a day at work, checking out courses and things. And then I've got a very active family, so I've got 3 teenage children that do a lot. So most weekends we keep free to go and do just stuff with the kids, really, climbing and paddling and skiing and kiteboarding, whatever it is, seasonal stuff. So we're always out doing stuff. So I think if you sort of added up a normal week for me, which would involve just sort of maintenance training and some adventures with the family, you're probably looking at sort of at least 10 hours, probably 15 hours of activity in a week. But
right.
that's just keeping active. Like I'm not trying to hit heart rate zones or anything like that. It's just basically out there just doing stuff in nature. And then my training would really only come into play about 6 weeks before a big race, and that's actually where I'll block out my calendar and actually start doing specific targeted training that I think is geared towards what I can expect in the race. And and that can be up to, well, it can vary a lot, but that's when you start looking at more like the 30 or 40 hour weeks of training and a lot more specific targeted sort of training.
40-hour week, that's a big week. No wonder it's got to be a full-time gig, trying to do that 40-hour week. I'm sure that takes its toll on the family too, wouldn't it? But I guess obviously you're an active family and you're an active father, they would have a certain amount of understanding. So look, this is just what's got to happen for this particular race.
Yeah, that's right. And I am fortunate that I have quite a lot of flexibility around my day. So I've often got a workload to do each day, but I can get up early in the morning and do 3 or 4 hours in the office go out training for the day, and then come home and sort of sneak in a few more hours of work to make sure I kind of stay on top of the jobs I'm doing.
Yep.
And often during the week, I'll just train during the school hours. So, my kids usually jump on their bike at 8 o'clock in the morning to the bike down to the school bus, and then they get home about 4. There are days when I'll bike to the bus with them, and then I'll go cycling, and I'll do like a 7 hour sort of bike ride or something, and then sort of be home the same time as them. So in that sense, like the impact on
it's a long day.
The impact on
see your kids. I'll be a bit hotter
right.
next time. You're gonna have to push me up this hill.
Yeah, but it kind of means I can be quite present and be around for the kids, when they get home from school and things, as well as getting my training done and things. So I guess you just try and make it work. But certainly for me, the amount of racing I've done over the years, as I know what target sessions I have to do before a big race, and I kind of know that if I don't do this amount of training, then I'll be letting my team down. And you just have to make it work. You have to fit it in.
Yeah, and I guess that's the biggest motivator, isn't it? I suppose you know the sort of people you're dealing with, and you know what sort of condition they're going to bring themselves in at, and if you're going to fall behind, you're only going to suffer in that day. Those 5, 6, 7 days.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. I mean, there's nowhere to hide when you get out there. If you haven't done the training, you get exposed pretty quick. And to be honest, I've only ever turned up to a couple of races where I've been a bit undercooked in terms of I haven't done the training, but I've been honest with my teammates about that, and there's usually good reasons for it.
Yep.
But it's no fun. It's no fun going into a race knowing that you haven't done the preparation, and you just know you're going to hurt more. And it's just no one wants that, for your team. So.
Your team. So I know there's 4 of you. Obviously, do they live close by, or are they spread out over? I think you're in the South Island, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm in the South Island. There's 3 of us in the South Island. So Stu lives in Auckland. Chris is in Queenstown, and I'm in Motueka in Tasman.
Yep. And
Sophie has been moving around quite a lot in the last few years, but she's actually moving to Nelson next month. So she's not too far away. But we generally have always lived in different parts of the country, so we don't see each other that much. During a year, we often just catch up at the races and stuff.
So you keep in touch and say, "Hey, mate, just smashed out 7 hours. What are you doing today?"
Well, sometimes not that much actually, but we'll often if we're passing through, someone else's town, we'll catch up for a bit of training, or if the families are kind of holidaying around, we'll try and meet up and do a few things. But no, most of the time, to be honest, we just let everyone know, just go and do their training, and everyone knows, they to turn up to the race, good to go, and it's fine.
Yeah, that's the trust, I guess, isn't it? Over time, you just know, hey, he's always going to show up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and actually, to add to that, I actually coach Sophie, so I kind of have a lot of input into her training. So most of the time, I know what she's doing, and that's motivating for me as well, because I'm like, well, if I'm expecting her to do this level of training, then I need to be doing kind of an equal amount relative to me. So yeah, that's another sort of hidden benefit, I guess you could say.
That chick seems like a champion, eh? She's like, that'd be a daunting task, I can imagine, for probably a female in this racing, because as a general rule, the males are going to be going a little bit faster. Like it's just, and so you would probably inherently, and I don't want to speak for the females or piss anybody off here, but you'd probably inherently think you may be a weaker leg. You may think, oh look, I've really got to step up because these guys go pretty well. But she looked like she just didn't even miss a beat, that girl.
Yeah, no, she's an incredible athlete. I think most of the women that I've raced with would agree that the first day in an adventure race can be not much fun, especially if it starts on foot or on bikes. Paddling's a bit different because the team, you kind of share the load as a team a lot better.
Yep.
But after the first day, everything kind of levels out. The whole speed of the race slows down. I think the guys just kind of they've burned all their testosterone up, so they're kind of just cruising a bit more.
Yeah.
There's not so much chest beating going on. And then the race, and then after that, I think you just become 4 people out on the course. It's not gender is kind of relevant, but certainly in the first day, it can be pretty tough. And I think, from a few chats I had with Soph before the start of the race, she had nearly 4 years away from racing to go and start a family, and she's got a couple of kids, and she works as a doctor, and life's busy for her, and things have changed. So I know coming into Eco Challenge that she was pretty unsure if she could get back to the kind of level that she used to race at, but certainly for the guys in the team, we had no doubts that she would be great.
Yeah.
So we supported her as much as we could.
A few things I watched. She's laughed like when they got to the top of that mountain you climbed up, and then someone said, "Oh, we're swimming now." And she just smiled and said, "Okay." And I thought, geez, that takes some character to sort of like, it didn't. She just sort of all the time was smiling. I really it really impressed me. Like she's like, just smile. Okay, let's do it. Like no complaining, no like, oh God, you think we should do this and that, which I guess I probably never expected her to be like, but yeah, I just thought that'd be a pleasure to have someone like that on board that just goes, okay, let's do it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. She's got a great temperament and good sense of humour, and I think that's our team culture as well. That if you can't kind of laugh and joke about the hardship of the race, you kind of get beaten by it. And for us, often. Yeah, I don't think we were actually joking that much after we sort of all had early stages of hypothermia, but most of the time,
sounds funny.
We'll, yeah, that's right. Most of the time, we'll kind of, literally that, just try and laugh things off and make a bit of a joke and keep things pretty lighthearted. And I think as part of that team culture for us as well, I think, keeping the race in perspective is really important, and that's part of it as well. Like knowing that. Sure, the race is big. It's a big race, and sure, there's some prize money, and sure, there's kind of there's lots of teams want to win the race, but there's a lot of other things going on in the world that are far more important. And I think we try and keep that perspective. When we're out racing as well.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to go into the memory bank a little bit here. So, a couple because you've done so many of these adventure races, and we'll speak a little bit about how popular they're becoming now as well, but. What's one of the what's the hardest race you've ever done? What would you consider to be the hardest one you've ever done? Not including the ones you said you're a bit underdone, but the ones that was just you thought, holy shit.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult question to answer because what tends to happen in a race is that there'll be really challenging stages or times in the race where you're kind of going far out. This is pretty difficult right now. But then other parts of the race where you're just cruising, you're just loving it, and it's just easy and fun and enjoyable. The only time that I would say that I've really sort of could throw a blanket over a whole race and say, man, that thing was epic, was nearly always when you're actually feeling sick or you kind of not racing at 100% because of medical reasons. And I've done a few races where I've got sick quite early on in the race, and it's just become a huge sufferfest because you're actually dealing with an illness. While the whole time during the race. But to answer your question, I think if I was to kind of just start picking out a couple of events, or certainly one that said that was out there on the frontier, the World Champs in Brazil in Pantanal in 2015. Mm-hmm. I mean, that would be by far the most remote that I've ever been in an adventure race. In terms of just out there in the wilderness and just coexisting with a whole lot of dangerous animals and just being somewhere where you knew that if you needed emergency help, that it wasn't going to come fast, and that was pretty special. That was a real cool race.
You say special. I don't, special doesn't come to mind when I think of that. Man. Because I guess there'd be a vulnerability you'd feel too, where I've thought this a few times in different things. You think, I wonder if the race organisers actually know what we're doing. Like, did they plan for us to be here? Because surely not. You think, no, we shouldn't really be here.
Yeah, there is that. But I think, I mean, speaking for myself, but my teammates would come under this as well. But, we, in everyday life, like I'm doing challenging trips. So, one thing I enjoy doing is going and doing a really challenging trip in the mountains or an ocean paddling trip that's really challenging. And, we're often in environments in New Zealand mainly where we're actually out doing an expedition, and it is dangerous and it is real, and we have to make very, very sensible decisions
Yeah.
in order to stay safe or not to basically, have someone killed. And we often will say, you're never going to be in that situation in a race because it's essentially a bit of a sterile environment. It's a bit more controlled.
Yeah.
So that Puntanal race was pretty unique in that we're actually in a race and still had that feeling that we're actually, right now, we're actually just 4 people out here on this epic expedition. And there will be a point in a few days where we kind of get back into the kind of the safety of an event.
Yeah.
But right now we're not. We're on our own out here. And so I guess that's what I mean by it being special. Like it felt more like what we go and seek when we go and do our own sort of challenging trips.
Yeah, yeah. So what place makes you think not for me? What when they announce, okay, there's going to be a race in this place, do you think, okay, I'm gonna just pretend and hope that other teammates didn't see that one, and I'm just gonna let that one slide? Is there any place like that you think, I'm not going back?
Not so much a place, but certainly for me, it's a zone. So I don't acclimatise well. Just genetically, I think I've grown up in New Zealand, but my father's from Samoa, so I'm half Samoan, and for some reason, I just don't adjust to being in the big mountains. And when I sort of mentioned before about me sort of having to suffer with illness through races, it's been the altitude races.
Right.
And I just won't race at altitude anymore, for me, but also for my team. And so if Eco Challenge said, hey, we're going to organise this awesome race in the Himalayas, I go, well, I can guarantee 100% that I will not be there.
Yeah.
But in terms of other sort of climates and countries and stuff, no, it's all pretty much fair game for me. Nothing comes to mind that somewhere I wouldn't go.
Yeah.
But
altitude,
altitude, no.
What about an individual leg? What's been the worst individual leg where you thought at the end of it, I'll never do that again?
I reckon if I had some time to think about this, I'd be able to come up with an
I should have sent you some questions, but I like to spring them on you. Yeah.
There has been some real shockers. I remember one that comes to mind was in the World Champs in Tasmania in 2011, where it was freezing cold and we had to paddle these lakes, and they gave us, I think, either a 2-person or a 3-person kayak, and there's 4 of us, so we had no freeboard on it. So it's freezing cold. We've been racing for a few days, and we're trying to paddle. We're squashed onto this boat that's practically sinking.
Yep.
And I just remember getting to the end of that stage, being cold and miserable, and just questioning the decision making of who thought that was a good idea, and getting out and saying to the staff there, that's got to be one of the most stupid things I've ever done in an adventure race before. Which is bad, really, because it's not there. They had nothing to do with that. But yeah, it was just one of those crazy things. But there has been some pretty mad stages. Abu Dhabi, racing in Abu Dhabi, the big desert runs, the sort of the 100 and sort of 30 or 40k desert runs, they're pretty out there. I remember the second time I raced in Abu Dhabi and we did that. I think it literally was. I think it was a 144k desert run. I just remember saying to myself, trying to program it in my brain, like, do not ever do a desert run ever again.
Yeah.
But you sort of forget after a while, and
you must have a shocking memory. You must have a shocking memory of the stuff you decide to forget, because that would be imprinted in my mind. I would think 10k into that, I'm not coming back here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no. So no, there's been a few things. So
nice.
Yeah, horse trekking I'm not fond of as well. Not so much now, but there used to be horses involved in races, and I never really thought that was a great thing. Just too random. It's too random.
A good time to rest?
Yeah. What sort of? Well, if you get the right horses, but there's been nightmare stories of teams kind of having horses take off with their packs and chasing horses around, trying to get their gear back, and horses refusing to move.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's yeah.
I can imagine
it's
that would be one of the stupid
horses,
things.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It seems like a weird thing. They tell you never to work with children or animals.
Yeah, exactly.
It turns out,
right.
And what about the popularity of adventure racing now? Have you noticed, because back when you were sort of started and really got into it, it would have been pretty obscure sport, wouldn't it? That you tell people what it is you do, they'd look at you a bit sideways, and But it's sort of, I guess, in the information age and the internet being a lot more readily available, a lot more people are finding out about it. Is popularity sort of becoming a lot more?
I really feel I can only comment on that with any authority with what's happening in New Zealand. And I think in New Zealand the popularity is high, and the sport started here. So I think it was obvious that there was always going to be a following.
Yep.
And then we had the big Southern Traverse race for many years. We've got the Godzone race, but there's also a lot happening in secondary schools with a number of different programs for youth, opportunities for adventure racing. Our company does a lot for women's adventure racing. And so when we go and do a big race like Eco Challenge, there's an audience that knows about it and wants to see it and follows it and does that. So certainly in New Zealand, I think the sport is strong on many levels. I mean, it could improve, but I think adventure racing here would it be a household term? I don't know if I'd go that far, but it is quite well known. I think there are some other countries around the world where it's going pretty strong, but there's other countries that were strong. I think it's dropped off. So globally, I'm not sure. I mean, I'd like to think that it's continuing to grow, and I think this event will really help that.
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, man, I really appreciate your time, Nathan. Like, you're certainly a bloke I've been wanting to tattoo for some time. I've always sort of admired what it is you do in that race. You're a madman, a calculated madman by the sounds of it. But look, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'd love to have you in the studio if you're ever on the Gold Coast, if we're ever allowed to travel again, and if you're ever over here, and I'm sure we'll cross paths soon.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, mate, and look forward to seeing you more in these races, and maybe even catching up one day.
Yeah, nice one. No, cheers. Thanks for your time.
Take care, Nathan.
Cool, man.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye, mate.
Go on. Thanks. See ya. Bye-bye.